journalism industry are constantly rejecting this notion that they are a part of a dying profession, because they're right. They're not. It's just in a constant state of evolution, forever changing formats and straying further away from traditional reporting. Now, this is all in the name of connectability. The media industry has to be engaging and accessible in this technological era in order for news to be heard. Now, as journalists, we know that we have to be constantly adapting to be consumed. So why, as an industry, can we still be so reluctant to accept these new formats when they rise up? The rising format I'm referring to is, of course, podcasts, and the emerging yet controversial role they are playing in investigative journalism, particularly in the highly saturated age of true crime podcasts. Today on Questionable, I'm here with fellow journalist Kristen Cam, and we're going to be taking a deeper look at whether or not podcasts have a place in the journalism industry. So hello, Kristen. Can you tell me a bit about what you think of these elusive podcasts?
Well, I can definitely see the benefits that lie in it, It's a great channel of communication that's reaching a lot of people right now. I just think at this stage it's too early to know whether they are worth the investment.
Yeah, look, it's true. They are quite expensive and time-consuming to produce.
Yeah, so I guess the real telling point is, what are they bringing to the table that isn't already being done in the industry?
Well, I think personally, rather than bringing anything new to the table, it's revamping and enhancing journalism as we know it, in both an ethical and logistical sense.
Okay, well, ethically then, how so?
The entire premise of investigative journalism is to reveal wrongdoing. So I think as long as true crime podcasts are actively doing this, then it's an effective use of the format. Now, are you familiar with the Lady Vanishes?
Yeah, that's the Marion Barter one, right?
Yeah, exactly. So this podcast investigates the bizarre circumstances of Marion's disappearance in the late 1990s. Now, this series has gotten quite a following. Producer Alison Sandy has said that in 1 month, they actually got 4.5 million listens from all over the world. This kind of traction isn't only super impressive, but has also been totally pivotal in making breakthroughs in this case all these years later. In episode 12, which, fun fact, is actually Alison's favourite episode, they begin with an announcement that they've received word that Marion was, for the first time, added onto the National Missing Persons list. Take a listen.
I received an email from Sean Fewings from the New South Wales Police Media Unit. It reads,
"A police review of the investigation into the whereabouts of a Queensland teacher has determined that information will be forwarded to the coroner and the case reinstated as a missing person case."
Now, had Alison and the Channel 17 chosen not to produce this podcast, to not tell this story and raise all this new evidence, then there is no way that the case would have gotten this kind of attention that would bring it back into the eyes of the public and, more importantly, the authorities. Marion's daughter Sally has always believed her mother is still out there, and thanks to this podcast, I think she's able to have some kind of justice restored. We have to remember that underneath it all, journalists are the fourth estates that hold big governing bodies like authorities accountable for the sake of the public interest. Now, Lady Vanishes successfully brought new evidence to light and literally changed the state of a cold case. If that doesn't align with these principles, then I just don't know what does.
Okay, well, as lovely as it is that Marion's daughter gets to tell her story and investigate the truth, isn't it a bit hypocritical that a podcast produced by a journalist follows such a bias?
Yeah, I can definitely see what you mean there. I think in the case of Lady Vanishes, it is totally ethical and rather quintessential that they do exclusively explore this one side. But there is more than your fair share of podcasts out there that do take the approach of exploring both sides equally. One of those is In the Dark Season 2.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm not too familiar with that one.
Right, so basically it focuses on Curtis Flowers, a man who was tried 6 times for the same crime by the same prosecutor over 21 years. Because this is such a unique and well-known case, a lot of people have formed very divided opinions on it. Now, rather than rehashing the details of the case, this podcast more so explores these different opinions and takes a focused look at the evidence involved and the potential wrongdoings of authorities.
Curtis Giovanni Flowers murdered those 4 people. There's no doubt in my mind. And I think he needs to fry in hell where he's going.
If he was executed, would you go watch?
You damn right I'd go watch. I will stick the needle in him.
I mean, it's hard to trust this investigation. It's hard to trust the people who ran it, and it's hard to trust the prosecution trying this case. Hey, where are the facts? Where's the proof?
In the Dark presents listeners with all the evidence and lets them make up their own mind. Again, I just can't help but think this is pretty parallel to the purpose of journalism, informing the public on things so they're educated enough to form their own opinions.
All right, sure, I can definitely see how the podcast format would fit the ethical mold for investigative journalism. But I guess what I'm wondering now has more to do with the technicalities. Like, why do we even need to bother taking up a new mode of reporting when the industry manages as it is?
Well, coming back to what I said earlier, journalists are constantly having to adapt to formats to thrive in this technological age. I'm sure if you told a newsroom 20 years ago that the ABC would be sending out interactive news updates over Facebook Messenger using emojis, they wouldn't have believed you. Now, that's mainly because half those words didn't exist 20 years ago, but that's also kind of the point. It is so current. The ABC found a new mode of reporting on breaking news, and it works. Podcasts are just the new technologically compatible way of investigative reporting.
Okay, well, how are they so technologically compatible?
At the risk of sounding cliche, I think podcasts all round just add more dimension to reporting that you definitely wouldn't be able to have in the written format. For example, the audio clips. Rather than just having quotes from interviewees, we can hear actual voices. There could also be audio clips from real 911 calls, which adds a kind of urgency and emotion to the piece that you just couldn't get through text. Ultimately, investigative journalism is such a long-form style of reporting. I think podcasts use these number of different medias to make it so much more dynamic and digestible for the audience. The Unrvel series done by the ABC actually really effectively uses sound effects, and it does a great job of enhancing the imagery of their reporting. Take a listen.
The driver pulls the emergency brake. Stopping a 300-ton train quickly is impossible. It screeches down the straight track.
Now, you could be the best descriptive writer in the world, but nothing is going to transform an audience into a piece like appealing to their senses. It's obvious that the information is credible because accredited journalists wrote it, but the podcast package just allows it to come together in what I think is such a polished and attractive way. And just quickly, while we're on this kind of note of credibility, it's much easier to incorporate a range of different professional inputs through the podcast format. For example, the Lady Vanishes is produced, like we said, by Alison Sandy, but also features another Channel 7 journo, Brian Seymour. Now, you couldn't have two journalists write one story, but they can both contribute to one package. I just think two heads are better than one, and this can only mean a more legit and newsworthy story to come together at the end of it all.
Okay, so then I guess we still have to address the real kind of threat they pose to provoking a trial by media. How do we prevent this?
How do we prevent any kind of reporting from prejudicing legal cases? This isn't a line that journalists are unfamiliar with towing. It's something that we have always and will always have to be conscious of. I think it's clear from the examples we've looked at today that podcasts are especially successful in investigating unexplored sides of otherwise outdated cases. So maybe for now, we steer away from these current happening cases that could possibly be subjected to a trial by media. And then I don't personally see any harm in digging up old cases that remain stagnant to try and help these ones move along a little bit.
Yeah, look, well, you've definitely opened up my mind. I think there would be real benefit in news corporations exploring and funding this format a little more for investigative journalism.
All right, well, now that I've convinced you, you can go out there and convince all your mates too. Look, thank you so much for coming and having a chat to me today, Kristen.
Thanks for having me, Lucy.
And thank you guys for listening. Make sure you go and check out those podcasts we've talked about today. Maybe form your own opinion and be sure to tweet me at _Lucy Loram. And always, guys, keep it questionable.